I'm streaming now. Let's hope. Oh, there we go. I have no idea what's. Okay, so yeah, I think I should be started now. My name is Minty Root. You've probably heard of me for in a couple of projects, such as Project Undercloud, Luna's Determination, Good Morning Baltimore, The Fall of Sunset Shimmer, The Beginning of Harmony, which released a couple of months ago, and you've probably heard also in such projects such as Aquaman and Maleficent Mistress of Evil, which I'm talking about the films right now. It's so today what I'm gonna do is a retrospective, basically about the whole the whole concept of animation. Basically, from my point of view, not because I don't want to explore what other creators did. It's just that in my case, I know what was my own intentions back in the days, and I don't want to talk too much from the point of view of other people. I don't want to put words in their own mouths. So what I'm gonna do is explore a bit how I started back in 2013 because I want to explore what basically some fan project of mine, but also how I was impacted by other projects. I'm gonna show a bit how from the perspective of the software itself because a lot of people just look at fan animation as the result. They basically think we push a lot of buttons, but they don't really think a lot about where we push those buttons. And so basically what you see here basically is the computer I've been using for a couple of years. It's basically just a desktop. It's not the best CPU in the world. It's a 2015 CPU along with a massive display that I bought last year. No, actually the year before. Now we're 2021. Actually, funny thing, I didn't have a car at the time. It was a 35-inch display. I really wanted it. I didn't have a car. I didn't want to go and get a cab for that. So I took the subway to the Best Buy to get the display because it was on sale and I didn't want to have to wait. So I had the giant box with me, walking from the store to the subway just to try to get it there. It was quite the experience. But actually, I say that I started 2013 actually, so the computer I was using back then was just this thing. Nothing really special. It's a 2011 MacBook Pro. It's not really much. It's actually I haven't used it in a while for two reasons. For one, this is so obsolete that Apple's not offering any software update anymore, and the problem is that Blender is now requiring the latest version, or at least the one that right after the one that is no longer supported. And there's the battery. The battery, like they actually replaced. They basically made it replaceable, and I did. And then the replacement battery also died. So this is basically now a paperweight. It's not a end of the world either. It's like a paperweight that is like 10 years old. If I bought it last year and now it was a paperweight, I would be kind of mad. But yeah, it's not the end of the world. I had it back in the days. I had a smaller table. It was just plugged in a big screen and a keyboard and mouse, and it was basically work on that. And yeah, it's pretty old. Like there's two USB 2.0 ports in that thing, and yeah, even then it was already outdated. So like that. And so if people wonder what this monitor and this keyboard are connected to, it's the Hourly Pony server, which is actually an even older laptop. Basically handling it. So back in the day, one of the things that was one of the reasons why I got involved in the fandom in the first place was that we had I had some knowledge in Flash, and when I heard that the show was animated in Flash, I was quite excited, and I was thinking, should I try it on my own? And obviously I was kind of unsure what I should do in the first place when it came, And one resource that really helped for a lot of people was when Double Ring Boom decided to share the resources. They call them puppet rigs, and then we realized later that it was not the term that we should use. So the one thing that we had, and yeah, actually, right now it's not what my display usually looks like. Basically crimming it to make it so people can actually see what's going on the screen. But yeah, the double rainbow rigs look like that. Or I would say they looked more like this because kind of lying. Yeah, one of the problems we had when they released them is that, of course, I'm not there to trash people who worked in it. One of the problems we realized was that we realized that our knowledge of what how the show was done was not the best. There was a few things we didn't realize, like for example, the colors are all wrong. Instead of being because it was more it was not that warm of a yellow for her mane or her eyes. Her eyes just look golden in that one, and someone tells me that. Oh, all right. So we had a few problems with those rigs. For one, if you zoom in and you look, for example, at the lines that made just the way that the lines connected with the legs, instead of going with the sharp end to try to to make to fit with the show style, kind of like, for example, this sharp hand here with the wing. It was basically it basically just went with the line tool, and that was it. And that was one of the things that didn't help for the all those projects. One of the problems we had was that I had to taper at them to make them a bit more accurate. Just go back and clicking. Yeah. Sorry, I was just clicking one thing and I lost the stream for the stage. There we go. So, yeah, one of the things we did back in the days to try to fix that was it was really annoying because one of the features introduced later that would actually fix that. Modify shape, convert line to fills. Basically, instead of going with how the line would go, where you basically just change the so basically treat it like some kind of weird rectangle, so you'd actually be able to change that part. So we need to then cut it with a line, do this, then go back. And the problem with that is that since you go with basically, since you can't really go with the basically you cannot change it as much as you would do before, so you'd be stuck. You'd be basically stuck with a line that was already converted, so you wouldn't have a lot of room for change afterwards. It was pretty annoying, and that was a problem they had with the show because the version of Flash they had lacked the feature that actually Flash introduced it. I think it was either 2014, 2015. But basically, instead of having to do that the line taper, they had a tool that was here, the width tool. That basically, I think they already had it in Illustrator. You basically just grab this part, grab. Yeah, the thing is really annoying because you need to grab like that, and then you just change the way that it's curved. So you basically have that sharp hand, but you'd actually have the flexibility of moving it around. Then you're gonna think, well, when would I need to move it around? Because for the hooves, obviously you can change between the poses. But for example, when you had a walk cycle, the idea that you had two legs actually bending, because one of the things you could do actually with the way that the rigs were done, for example, if you wanted to move them, one of the problems with Flash is that all you had is scaling, translating, you had a rotation that you could do. So for example, if you wanted to have one of the things so when you wanted to have, for example, rotation, you could go actually do that. So you have derpy waving, actually waving really badly, and then you have skew, which is basically just rotation but along one axis instead of rotation along both axes. So it was pretty annoying, and the way that the double rainbow rigs did also for when you had poses, for some reason they thought it was the best idea to put those poses in layers. It would be hidden. No. And you'd basically have those poses. So for example, when you had a character that just wanted to just bend her leg, you'd need to switch between those poses. So you'd either hide the layer because you had it set as a guide, which don't actually appear in the final thing, or you basically just move it back to the original layer. But the problem with that is that if you want to do actually move those pieces around, you had to move all the pieces, and you cannot actually tween between one pose to the other like that with all those pieces, which is really annoying. And one of the problems we had with the double rainbow rig, again, because at the time we really didn't really know much about how the show rigs worked. All the poses, if you go with the front, the side, and the profile, all of those were actually separate rigs that were basically just connected by the fact that they were in the same file. So if you had a character, for example, I think it's this scene. For example, when you had a character that, for example, the scene where you had Derpy who was actually turning her head, what you need to do is that you need to animate all the rig with all the poses from that angle, and then you'd actually need to here actually switch between the head of the profile, the tricky rig, to the head of the profile rig, or the front view. So you'd have this head, and that would basically switch, and it was really annoying because you need to resync everything. You'd either and yeah, basically that was one of the things that really annoyed, because if you had a character talking and then turning their head, you'd have to figure out when the head turn would happen at the precise moment, and then you have to stop the lip sync the character when the character would be turning, then try to match it with the new one. You'd also have some struggle if you had a character going from front to profile, for example. For example, you have a character who's just front and just runs on the side. So it was pretty annoying, but you know, at the time, if you look, for example, at what we had in the fandom, it was a lot of characters just talking, and we were happy with that. We had, if you look at other projects, taking Epic Pie Time, Epic Cupcake Time, which were not, as far as I know, done with those rigs. They actually made their own, but a lot of that was just was mostly characters not turning their head a lot. At least not from a tree cube to a profile or a front. It was basically either nodding and was it. And it worked. We didn't have worry too much about that, and you know, the fandom, we all just enjoy having those fun animations to just enjoy. And at the time, if you look, for example, at because one of the things we had with Flash that we could do, because you've all heard of Flash being discontinued, it only applies to Flash, the Flash play on browsers. That's why you can still use Animate, which is actually just renamed Flash. And you look at that and you think, well, back in the days you could actually deliver those Flash animations and you wouldn't worry too much about the. Actually, I'll talk about it later, but you could just animate in Flash, export as an SWF, and just release it online on some websites. And that was it. Yeah, it was pretty straightforward. I didn't really do that at the, back in the days because I had other plans, but I'll also explain later. But yeah, one problem you've seen with those rigs, for example, one that I fixed was the colors that really felt more like, if you compare to that kind of feel, like burnt, like it really felt weird. And I checked it, I compared with what they had in the basically what they had in the whole rainbow with the seemed derpy, and as it turned out, the colors were fine. So you just look at that and you think, oh, they probably realized their mistake later on. There was also one problem that we realized with the eyes. The eye shine just looked weird. So as it turned out, I think they just realized they just did the wrong scale. But the thing is that they did the wrong scale, and then they baked the scale on it. They basically put that all in the layers. So, and for some reason, the all the topology of that is just weird. Just those 2 points like that. It was pretty annoying, but you know, back in the days, we didn't know any better, and we were fine with that. So, but one of the problems we realized also is that there's a front, there's a 3Q, there's profile. That's it. What do you do? Like, what are you gonna do? And one of the solutions we had was to create new rigs for the back and the back 3Q. Also when I said 3Q is for 3/4, the idea of the head that is not quite profile, not front, but just between the two. That's what they call 3Q. But yeah, and back 3Q is like that, but facing backward. So we had that, which was basically just rigs. Back in the days, I didn't know any better, so I did that like that. And we realized later how much of a problem it could be, because, for example, with Final C project on the cloud, one of the problems we had, one problem I had was that Derby was turning, and you can see all the stepping, all the frames that I did, and it was really annoying because it was basically switching from one rig to the other, just try to get that, just to get that rotation, and it was basically tedious because you had to go inside the rig and outside the rig just to try to make it fit, and it sort of works with the just the way that Derpy just opens her wings and the fact that everything else spins at the same time. So it, you know, back in the days it worked fine. Also, one detail that's pretty interesting is how I did the pillar instead of going with 3D model. It was basically just a few masks. Basically, kind of like how they did in the Return of Harmony. You had a shot where you had the stained glass, and the stained glass had some kind of 3D rotation. You had the pillars in the back, and the pillars were basically just masks with texture that was rotating and translating. It was pretty much it. So you just had the translation, and just worked. So, but you know, afterwards we realized that those rigs had some issues. Some under the hood, some that were layering. So so what really helped is that we actually figured out how the show rigs worked, and we did our own interpretation of that. Basically, one of the ways we actually fixed that was actually pretty straightforward. Instead of having each rig for each angle, so what we had was that the whole 360 of that was actually within the rig, and the head itself also had its own 360. And actually, it's kind of funny because you've probably seen it was actually it was kind of funny because there was that animation error with screen. There was that animation error where you see Syrian Bodesh head basically just rotate weird like that, and some people were kind of confused, and actually it just turned out that the way that the head just works, if you get it out of sync, it just starts. Let's go with the front. Yeah, basically the thing with the head is that the head actually rotates along its own timeline, and basically the idea is that both are supposed to be synced at all time anyway. But the thing is that the head is going to rotate along its own axis, and I think the way that the show rig does that is actually according to the axis of the puppet instead of the whole pony instead of being the axis of the head. So it actually rotates even more to actually. So basically, that was the one done by Tired Brony. That was the one that introduced me to that whole idea of doing the rigs, and I wanted to do my own as well. So, and at the time we realized we have rigs for mares and that's it. So, what are we gonna do? Are we just gonna use the old double rainbow rigs for everything that's not a mare? And we realized, one thing I realized was if it could do that, could I? So I started. One of the things pretty helpful was just to go with pony refs and basically just do my own rotation, try to make it fit. So just getting some screen caps where the head would be, where the body parts would be, and basically getting that head rotation done. And basically what I did afterwards was to just go with the. I actually did a whole time lapse of all the entire process. The idea of just vectoring all the pieces, but in a way that would actually make them fit together. Because one of the problems we also had with the Boring Boom is that it's kind of subtle. It actually appears more in the Philly rigs, but the mane and the body, there are actually two separate line thicknesses. You see the mane a bit thinner in terms of line thickness. It's really subtle. Actually, if I zoom in, you can actually see it more. And it was even more pronounced in Philly rigs. It was really annoying. And so basically what I did was to build a whole 360 rig with that, which later supplemented with the horn, and to basically try to get it to just look right and to rotate fine. There was also actually one of the things which really helped because the head rotation, since it's its own, you can actually recycle some pieces. Actually, you can see it more. Because one of the other problems was redundancy. There was a lot of pieces that were actually the same. Actually annoying, but for some reason this piece for the back leg is not the same. Oh, not the back leg, the front right leg is not the same as front left leg for no reason at all. So we were really confused with that. It doesn't really impact much in terms of memory usage because pretty light, but it actually impacts when you have to recolor stuff, when you have to do changes. So we actually fixed that with the rig. There was also all the poses for the wings. We realized that the front, the wing flaps are actually the same from a lot of angles. So just having the wing flaps be reused everywhere really helped. Also, yeah, I still had the wing flaps for the Dinky rig because I realized if I'm gonna improve the rig and make a generic version afterwards, I should keep the wings, which I did, which really helped. So that really helped. But yeah, a lot of that was just figuring out Flash, figuring out how to show the things. It really helped just to get a good idea, just to get to make our own rigs. We worked on a project like Dinky's Destiny, where we also did one for Luna, which was basically the same idea with what we had as references, and was quite proud of that because one of the problems we had was at Nightmare Moon back in the days. We had the few seconds where she appeared. Well, she actually appeared for a few minutes when for the pilot, and a lot of the references we had just looked weird. When she returned in season 4, the whole battle was about a minute, and if you look at her screen time, it's pretty limited. So I guess I could. Yeah, when we did Nightmare Moon, a lot of references was guesswork, and it was really annoying because basically a lot of things was just, for example, if you look at what we had, basically just trying to get the right angle for the head, and then we had to just draw the stuff that we couldn't figure out. Then what we did was to vector all of that, and just to get the Nightmare Moon rig, and then we realized later that we had also had the need for the main, which was also its own cycle. So it was pretty cool because we had something showed it was never done in the fandom. If I recall, there was some people who were starting to make their own Nightmare Moon rig, at least in Flash. And yeah, I was really proud because that one was mine. So yeah. One of the problems we also hit is that her main, the thing is that there's a blur, but the blur effect, the way that it behaves in Flash, that it actually it blurs movie clips. The problem with movie clips don't actually move in the timeline. You actually move when you execute the file, but if you actually go with After Effects, it doesn't actually execute the file, it just reads the frames. So the main would be static if you had the blur. So we had to actually export the main separately from the rig, blur it, and then add it to the rig using things like After Effects. After Effects, for example, when it came time to recombine things like recombining the shadows, it was pretty cool because the shadows are actually a map of the basically just it was basically just a black and white map of all the animations we already had, just offset with the right perspective. So yeah. I've been talking a lot about Flash. Guess I could show a bit some of the other stuff that we had. It was also pretty cool. Back in the days, we had basically when I wanted to have some 3D animation, because I thought, well, back in the days my Flash animation skills were not the best, so I thought, well, let's try to prove in other ways. So we had Blender. Well, I had Blender to try to get to do some 3D sequences. But back in the days, again, one of the problems we had with Blender was still wasn't really new because Blender has been there for as it's at least 2005, at least in the freeware version, the open source version. What we had as a problem is that the technique that we had for the shadows of reflection was pretty weird. For example, back in the days, specular is basically just reflective part. For example, if you look at how this thing is shiny, that's the specular part. And you look at shiny things, for example, if you go with a surface like a mirror surface, it's basically the roughness that actually goes with that. And roughness, so basically what you only needed to do with a proper, well, what we have now is that you go just with highly specular and you reduce the roughness to make it like a mirror, or you increase it to make it like brushed metal. But back in the days, what we had was a specular was completely separate things from a reflection. So you had reflectivity, you had the gloss, which is basically just roughness, but reversed. So one was completely mirror-like, and we had zero was completely rough. And back in the days, they did that because computing power was just the techniques that they had also to compute things was just not the best. So they had to reduce the the complexity a lot. So you had the samples, you had the depth, you had the reflectivity, you had the specular. Those was already there. Um, and just to give you a good idea of how slow this is, because the thing is that that whole thing was um, basically they call it ray tracing, and you think a lot about it. For example, nowadays with ray trace video games, where they have higher quality shadows and higher quality reflections. And that thing is not new. They've been using that since, well, they've been showing how it could be done since the 80s. And back in the days, they, the, they had limited resources, so they had approximations. And one of the approximations we have, for example, is the specular here. Um, so, and it's pretty slow what we have right now. I'm a and just to give you a good idea, it's gonna take about 2 minutes on a modern PC. So just think of a laptop back then. Part of why is that the way it actually did the ray tracing was pretty bad back in the days. Did For global illumination, it was not even turned on by default. And yeah, nowadays rendering is a lot of things can be done in the GPU. There's a lot of people still using CPU because that's not still not perfect. But one of the limitations we also had was that derpy hooves. Since derpy hooves and that shot was just her on the texture, you actually had to enable transparent shadows to actually get instead of the card, you actually had the shape of derpy hooves, and yeah, what I had to do was to actually angle it so you wouldn't see her in the light, which is kind of weird because she's still in the light. No, in that yeah, that's pretty weird. Um, the hourglass, the glass didn't actually let lights go through. Only the way that you have. Oh, you have problems? Oh no, actually, I don't have any drop frames. So, but yeah, the whole thing, the whole technique we had with Blender was still pretty slow. It was pretty annoying. Then we realized we had things like, well, that actually encouraged me to, when I went to VFX school afterwards, to try other rendering engines. Um, it was pretty slow, so we had to find techniques to slow down, to basically to reduce the usage. One of the techniques, for example, was that, for example, those the hexagons on top where you saw the cutie marks didn't do any reflections. You had I had to reduce samples in some of the objects to try to reduce the rendering times. Yeah, it was really bad. It was slow, but it worked. So I stuck with that for a long time. We had Dinky's Destiny, where I tried to reduce the usage of that as much as possible. So we had some 3D effects that actually did all in Flash. Actually, let me actually open up one of the shots I did. Less technology is more artistic. It's shot 13. Not sure 13 is. I think it was shot 9. And if I'm wrong, well, I'll have shown you other shots. And bingo, there we go. So one of the things we did is that instead of going with one of the things we realized, because doing that with ray tracing was pretty bad. So what we did was to actually go with basically just fake it in Flash. So we had a shot where we had reflections on the ground, which was pretty cool. We had just the rotation of the camera. The rotation of the camera itself was not is actually just using the skew tool with the ground. So you see that there's no actual 3D involved. If you go to Q like that, and I zoom. Oh, right, zoom this. Here. So you actually had that effect like that. It was pretty cool back then. You had all the objects that were also involved. For example, the statue, which was basically just tweening from one to the other. Tweening is tweening. You've probably heard of that either as tweening or keyframing. You basically tell the computer go from here to here, and basically just goes the linear way. Well, it's still linear, but I also added knees. Basically, instead of going with a speed as linear, it just goes. For example, well, it just starts slow, goes fast, and goes slow. A bit like you go with a real camera. Like you take a movement, you don't with a camera, you don't actually go at the linear speed. You actually start, you grab it, and then you have some speed, and then you slow down, and it really helped to make the movement a bit more appealing. You can actually do that with a lot of things, but one of the things that also helped a lot with that shot was that a lot of it was then used with compositing. So we had I think so you basically had that with the the idea of the gut rays that come from the ground, which are not perfect in that shot. I think it's just the approximate one, but it actually worked, and we were really happy. And one thing that also helped is that you had a rotation with Dinky. You see, so it's pretty cool because since we had the rig that could actually do those rotations, I could actually go from one rotation to the other like that with all within the same rig instead of doing that switch 48 angles. So I had Dinky, who was there. So I could switch the angle, which, yeah, looking back, it's not the most accurate rotation. But I could actually go from that rotation to then walk, and then use that walk because try to not really bridge the gap, but try to make you focus less on the rotation, more the action. So yeah, I'm doing a lot of time skip, but we realized, for example, with that, one of the problems is that Flash is good. Like if you want to get started with Flash and you want to, and you don't want to go, for example, Toon Boom, which people say to that it's a replacement. You can still do that. You can still export in Flash. Actually, there's a new tool. I won't show it here because it's probably gonna crash my computer. But there's export video now offered. Basically, what it does is that it exports that's an SWF file, and then it just runs that animation and just records it for you. Then you can use that video and just upload it on YouTube. In my case, I don't, because one of the things I do is that every shot is its own scene in Flash, so I can actually have a bit more room for editing. Also, if I lose one shot, I don't lose the entire project. Like I've seen a lot of people. Actually, I've done that even before I was doing pony projects. The whole animation was in a Flash project because you would actually export the whole animation as an SWF file. Back in the Newgrounds days, the limitation you had was one SWF file of like 10 megabytes. So you did reuse a lot of assets between the shots. But since I exported it as a video for YouTube, I didn't really have to worry about that. I could make changes in one shot that was specific for one shot and never have to worry about it. When you have to, so you don't have to worry about things like redundancy, for example. Yeah. It's also helped a lot for other projects, for like Luda's Determination, which was, I say, my last project in Flash, but Big Mac Horseman was technically the last one. Um, for example, when you have two characters interacting, um, and as I said earlier when I was talking about exporting in Flash, you see all those SWF, as, you see those SWF files which are all layers. For example, there's the desk and all the things behind the desk, like Shirley, the desk, the window. All those layers were exported separately because I wanted to do things like reflection. So oh right. So for example, I could have had some blur here to the just the galleries that came out of the room. I could have here it didn't really do that, but I could have some depth of field, which yeah, because one of the things we realized with After Effects, because the show actually uses After Effects for a lot of things. I guess I could show you a demonstration here. But if you had an object, because for example, they didn't really do that in season one or The Return of Harmony, which was actually done as part of season one. But when you had a pony who was holding things with her horn, one of the things that did originally was just having sparkles and a bit of glow around, was it? But the glow itself was not consistent with what the horn itself was, with some waves. One of the things we realized was do it quickly because I don't want to go overboard. Effect controls. So you could have you could actually enlarge, then you go with color correction tint. So for example, let's go with red glow around everything. So you'd have that part, you'd have another one. Like this. Actually, I think this one was. Wait, no. Select. Alright, so you have the glow around the character like that. It's not perfect here because I can go with. Yeah, actually, After Effects can open SWF files as layers. Sometimes it didn't go with that because sometimes it would just give some weird artifacts, but that happens. But yeah, you'd have this. You'd have an adjustment layer. Actually, it's not even an adjustment layer, but and all of those things I have learned from Grand Baudet or Baudet. I don't know how he pronounced his last name, but he basically he had a guide. You talk about lip syncing. You talk about those glows. You talk about everything. As with ripples. Yeah. Now I'm doing it all by heart. So. Actually, I'm gonna go with turbulent displace. It's not the actual one that they use, but I think it should do the job. You can actually go with that. Then you can go with the evolution, try to make it rotate like that. It's not the one that they actually use. I think no, there's no way for. I just forgot what's the name the one thing. Then you go with that, and you basically just go. You put that. I got you had some kind of cheap glow effect instead of having to do it frame by frame. Really helped me, for example, in scenes where you had, with objects levitating. I would just have my recipe. They also use that for crystal ponies. I won't show it here because too much trouble. But the crystal glow is really to export the pony as a separate layer from the rest of the scene. Have basically I have some gradient glow around the corners. You had actually, yes, I could at least show you what the effect look like. So you had generate cell pattern, and you had crystal plates. There we go. Basically, the whole effect for crystal ponies was this, and then you just have just have it evolve over time, and that was it. So, and that really helped me because not a lot of people do projects about crystal ponies. Partly because there's not much about them. You can talk a bit about Sombra, but there's not a lot of stories just about crystal ponies. So I do remember there was one in 2013. I think it was no, not the Tale of One Shadow. It was a story about Sombra, another character. And instead of doing that effect like that, they had what they had was that they had a cell pattern a bit like that. They had a character and they had a white background, so they didn't have to worry about masking. So the cell pattern, since it was all white, would actually just blend with background, and I think they just translated it. I haven't seen that one in a long time, so I'm just going from memory on that, and that worked. Sometimes you don't have to go with the really complex technical thing, and that happens. And one of the one of the cool things with that is that After Effects can also be used along with side with Toon Boom. So when I moved to Toon Boom because of the movie, and back then when the movie was released, a lot of people thought that ponies kind of look a bit weird. So my interpretation that I have, which is here. Here with Solid Glimmer, is more of an hybrid between the show and the movie because the eye glow was weird, the line thickness was much thinner, it kind of looked weird as well. And yeah, it's pretty cool because you compare a bit how Flash and Toon Boom looks like, and you're gonna think, oh, it's the same thing. It's not. Here I'm using the most advanced version. Wait, it's not even the right one. This one. So instead of being basically just the whole grid and the timeline, that's it. It all operates around the node view. Actually, every version uses that node view. It's just the premium version is actually one that actually shows you the view. So a lot of 3 layers are connected with pegs. So I'm just going with a tween where you just have a symbol. You have the you have all the pieces going together. So for example, now I have the peg that just holds all the pieces of the head except the eyes. So you can actually go with a rotation. And it actually helped because one of the problems I had, for example, with this shot is that I just translated from one angle to the other, but it's slightly off. But when you had characters that you wanted to have very subtle head movements, it was pretty tough because you have yeah, actually I guess I could show you. Let's see, I think that was 31? 30. Yeah, shot 30. One of the problems I had was in Luna's determination, you had a shot where the camera was rotating around Luna, and the shot was almost not in the project because I realized at some point that I had a recycled animation from a project that didn't happen where the camera was rotating. And it was pretty tough because I had to limit the head movement a lot because and I've shown it a couple of times, but the whole rig is actually a lot of pieces that are basically tweened. For example, you have the for example, you have the mount here. That's actually instead of being the actual show mount, I basically refactored it. And I had to, it's actually very wobbly here, but I had to tween it from this to this. As I tried to rotate it, I had the high animation on the separate layer as well. I had to, I had some pieces that were just appearing. I had the horn that actually had to be pretty subtle, but inside the horn there's actually a mask. The rings of the horn were actually moving alongside. But all of those pieces are there, and I had to do that just to get one head movement, which was pretty tricky. So all you had was just her moving her head up and the eyes up. And that was it. That was really head movement, and then I had it just a background, just not even rotating, was just translating with a bit of lens. Yeah, basically just a bit of lens distort, just try to make it a bit more angled, and that was it. So when I moved to Toon Boom, one of the things that was pretty cool was that Toon Boom is actually 3D. It's just basically a lot of layers that are connected together, and you can have, for example, an ortholog to make the layer always face forward, no matter what. It's not perfect, but it actually works pretty well. I had some things, for example, the mount itself. Since I wanted the muzzle to actually follow the perspective, it's actually pretty cheap technique that I had. That one was not introduced until the beginning of Harmony. The follow sets that Shimmer actually switched the muzzles. Center on selection. So basically, it's the muzzle piece that is basically on seven. There is this one that's supposed to be in front of the piece, but actually layered behind. So you'd actually have some more control over that. And it actually follows the it basically follows the rotation. So when she rotates her head, you can basically go with it basically just goes against it, and you get the actual angle. You have the mouth itself that is layered to be a bit behind, kind of like the mouth is supposed to be a bit behind the nose. Very subtle, but it kind of helps. You have the mouth itself as a deformer, because I realized while doing lip syncing that sometimes you go with because one of the problems with the way that Flash does lip syncing. Yeah, open up the mouth itself. Basically, the way that the mount works is that actually they actually did that in the show as well, because it's much easier to just reuse. But all the mounts are just frames that you switch between one and the other. So you have mounts for different phonemes. You have the mounts for happy, for sad, or just when Modby is talking. You have some extra happies. You have some customized ones. And that was basically what we had to deal with. And when it came time to go with Toon Boom, one of the cool things was that everything, or almost everything, can be set on the deformer. So let's rotate the head. Let's switch them out to. It's not perfect yet, but because I still have to switch between the mounts from the angles. Image switch. Can go to 2. Oh right, I'm stupid. The mount is set for the other angle. So there we go. There we go. So basically, since the mount is set on deformers, I can go. I can actually go with between different poses, and it will actually go with much more smoothly. And yeah, also some detail. There's three monitors. This one and this one are connected to my main computer. There's this one is connected just to another one. It's really stupid. I realized while I was working that since I usually leave YouTube to play a video because I like either working with the TV on or with a video, when a computer crashes or it just lags, YouTube also lags. It was really annoying because the since it was lagging, it was just really annoying. So I realized, well, let's go with my cheap laptop that still works. Still, it can actually play YouTube videos fine. So I just plugged it on the other monitor. I set it with mouse share app where I just go from one to the other with the same mouse. Um, this one's called Mouse Without Borders. There's other versions as well, but here it worked, and I was really happy. And I could also set it for renders because sometimes renders take a lot of time, especially when I showed the render that took 2 minutes just for one. I'll actually return on that later, but yeah, it was pretty cool with Toon Boom with all those deformers because you can actually go. It behaves a lot more like 3D animation. With pieces, I can actually go with different emotions, and this mouse is closer to how the mouse look like in the movie. I also added my own twist because I didn't want it to look too weird with something that was a bit shaded more like the show. Um, but yeah, all the pieces, for example, I can just take those pieces like this, just close them out, and that's it. So if I have some more complex mouth expressions, for example, let's go with no, sorry, being sad. Can go with that. Pretty straightforward. Um, so yeah, actually, I'm gonna show a bit. Oh shoot. It was pretty cool with the False Set Shimmer because there was one shot I wanted to pull for a long time. Kind of inspired by a shot from Lullaby, although I wanted my own twist. But what I wanted was to have Princess Celestia sitting on the balcony, and basically it's just a camera rotating around her. So what I did, and back then it was pretty tricky. What I did was that I did a very basic model for the high tower, and basically just matched the animation of the character in Toon Boom. It was pretty cool since I could do the head rotation. Um, yeah. I had to Play Blast. Oh yeah, Play Blast is basically not finalized render. It's basically just an approximation of the final render that you use just to give a good idea of what the render is going to look like. But basically, I had to match this rig that was basically just taking the proportions of the character and was just trying to do a match move. It wasn't perfect, but it worked here. So I had I basically had to just magic the movement of the camera, and it was pretty tricky as well because there was a lot of layers involved. The way that the main shifted. There was another cool thing with Toon Boom is that you can actually import 3D models. So I had the model, the crown and chest piece that were 3D instead of having to try to figure it out in 2D. Then I just had it in an outline. So you had the camera that kept just rotating around Celestia. I had to do a lot of image switches between some pieces from different angles, but it actually worked well here. So you have just the camera just rotate. There's the model piece. Back then it was still it was not the technique I use now, but what I did was that selection. Basically, I had the pose from one angle to the other, and I just did basically the equivalent of a shape tween in a Toon Boom. They call it morphing. You basically have you basically have this piece here that just goes from this shape to this shape. So when you go with between the two, it goes pretty smoothly. It's not perfect, but it works well. but basically just going from those layers in 3D space. Um, One of the problems I realized when doing that is that the camera movement leads the scene, not Celestia. Um, and I realized, well, I can already have 3D models for the I can already have 3D models for the crown, the chest piece. Why not import a 3D model for the environment? It was not perfect as an approach either, but basically what I figured out was that I could bake the lighting using Arnold. I could basically just bake all the shadows, the lighting on the model itself, and actually rotate the scene in 3D space within Toon Boom. So Celestia would lead the shot, that basically just lead how the eyes would move in the scene. And yeah, just to give you a good idea, it's not perfect because it's all the 2D character in the 3D environment, but from the angle of view, it actually worked well. And yeah, you can actually see that it's the whole thing that can rotate. There's behind. Behind is not 3D model, obviously, it's just a picture of your 3D model. I realized with the distance, the perspective would be minimal, so I could just do a pretty good matte painting and just match it, and it worked well. So I was pretty happy with that. And there's another scene that I can actually show. That one is Uni. Because I realized, well, let's go with shot is pretty ambitious. And one of the things I wanted to have was Celeste running on the 3D environment. Sorry, Toon Boom is not behaving the best when I have too many of them open, but that's to be expected. There we go. Yeah, actually, it's pretty good with Toon Boom already nowadays because Toon Boom has what I had before, one of the problems that would take about 15 seconds to just jump back into Toon Boom from another application, not even starting it. I think it was due to my hard drive. I had to do a whole complete system reinstall of my computer to afterwards. Uh, but yeah, one of the problems was really Toon Boom taking forever to load. So if I wanted to go interact with anything else, I had to prepare myself mentally for Toon Boom to take a while to kick back. But yeah, basically, one of the pretty cool things was that I could actually have the camera rotating around Celestia like that, and just as I did earlier, I can actually have the whole 3D set. It's not perfect since all the shadows are baked. Things like reflection on the ground shouldn't work because a reflection depends not just on what's on the surface, but also the angle of the normal. So so for example, when I had to have reflection of the window, I had to comp it myself. It was pretty tricky, but the whole thing worked pretty well, and I realized, well, what there's a lot of potential because it's all 2D characters interacting in 3D space that actually worked. You have Celestia here. You have the unicorn caretaker that's next to her that should walk in the scene behind her, and I thought it was pretty cool. So I was thinking, where can we push that technology? Um, we had one of the cool things is that that renderer can actually be used to call for Maya to render a scene. So I did some tests with where you had the character interacting with the whole 3D environment with reflections within Maya, and it was pretty cool until we realized that it needs to call for every frame, and calling takes about 30 seconds per frame, just calling. So you had to have that plus a rendering time. So we had to figure out another way to do that. And one of the cool things we did, yeah, I didn't prepare that one because I didn't think I would show that, but it's actually pretty cool. One build test. One of the things we realized was that we could actually ask for the position of the camera and actually make it interact with the whole Blender scene. And Blender actually changed a lot since then, but we could actually have the 2D rig all perspective correct with all the layers in 3D space and actually make it work with the 3D camera movement with Blender, so you have all the reflections. There's not much reflection in that scene because I didn't think of that much. I was more concerned about camera movement. But you could actually have the whole 3D set with Blender, and so we could actually have some tricky camera movements this time with that technique. And it was pretty cool because I realized with Blender, Blender changed a lot. They introduced a new rendering engine. I remember probably how it took 2 minutes just to get a single frame. With Blender, let me get a good camera angle. Blender introduced a rendering engine that's called Eevee. Basically, it behaves a bit like the rendering engine of a video game. It uses shadow maps and it uses screen space reflection, which is not perfect, but it's much faster. So you can actually iterate much faster. You can look at what it looks like in the final much faster, and doing that helps you figure out things much faster. So just let's start. I don't even know if it's going to recompute shaders this time. You still need a beefy graphics card. I have an RX 570, which like it's $200. It's nothing if compared to what Nvidia is doing with the RTX cards, but it actually has enough VRAM for that. But just let's go with that. Let's show how quick it renders. If it doesn't crash, hopefully. Yeah, one of the things is that since it's closer to how video games render with real-time renderers, it's going to need to recompute shaders. So there we go. That's it. It's not perfect with reflections. It's called screen space reflections, so it only reflects things you already see in the frame. So for example, if you have a mirror that reflects something off screen, you need a reflection plane, which is basically a probe with a camera that just looks at it from a different angle. If you don't have that, it's just going to reflect the environment map, which is basically just sphere texture of what's supposed to be in the sky. In this case, would be stars. So yeah, that whole set with Ponyville is pretty cool because I can actually export the camera from Toon Boom to interact with that set. So for example, if I had Starlight Glimmer, for example, in Town Hall, I could actually just position her on top of the Town Hall, put a camera here, just make her look good in front of the camera in 2D, and just export a camera to go with that that set in Blender. And then I would just combine the two together seamlessly. Of course, since it's 2D, I would need a way to go with shadows, but that's the pretty cool thing with Toon Boom is that there we go. So one pretty cool thing is that with Toon Boom, using a lot of weird coordinates, I could figured out a way to have actually shadows and reflections. It's not actually reflecting anything. It's just the way that it basically just scales the rig. So if you look, for example, at ground shadows, there's a shadow angle, which I can actually impact here. Wait, can I? Oh, right there. That value. I can change the skew to go more from an angle to the other, like this. There's also the scale. I can actually make it, instead of being a shadow behind, well, for a light source from behind, I can actually go from the front. It's not perfect. You can see a bit how it breaks because it's not perfect. You can also animate it, which is, for example, if you have a light source that changes, or you have, I don't know, character that moves in a way that the shadow needs to somehow move. yeah, that can also be done. It's pretty cool. There's also reflection, and it's all behaves with the confines of the perspective of the scene. So you can actually have the reflection behaves as well. It's not very helpful here because besides one scene on the balcony and another scene with the hall, there's not a lot of reflections. But the fact that I have that here and it's pretty easy to compute is pretty nice. Here I'm not too concerned about the animation of the reflection that much because it just goes with it. For example, let's go with seriously, keep messing up. That's alright. So if I rotate Starlight's head, the head reflection actually behaves in a way that might break a bit, but in this case, since it's not perfectly reflective, I can actually blur a bit and cover up a bit of detail, or in this case, the head is off screen, so you don't really have to worry about it. Actually, that's a pretty important thing. Kind of like how everything is cleaned up here for what the webcam sees, and it's a mess everywhere. You can make a mess outside of the screen in the animation. Like if I go back to the scene itself, it doesn't make any sense. Well, it actually kind of makes sense, but it's kind of a mess outside of the frame. You don't have to worry about how to animate outside of the frame. That's pretty much it. So just go with it and don't worry too much. Yeah. Yeah, there's a bit of spoiler for Starlight project. Actually, one thing I could show you that I've been working on that was pretty proud. Please don't crash, please don't crash. I was working that a bit during the holidays, a bit before the holidays, because I had to basically, since my laptop is not very good at handling a whole scene, I just take a piece of it to go at a time. So here's the model for the Golden Oak Library that I did. Basically, it's as accurate as I could make it, even though it doesn't make any sense. Like, you look inside, the scale is all off. It's one of those things, like kind of like in Doctor Who, where it's like the TARDIS is supposed to be bigger on the inside, but like everywhere, like I can't really think of. I can think of a few cases where they played around with that, where the house is bigger on the inside. It just happens. It's just that a smaller house is easier to frame for a shot, and bigger house is easier to get a lot of estate for characters to walk in to interact. So yeah, so you have the model that I did. That was pretty cool. It's kind of funny because I had model for the Golden Oak Library, but also the model for the Castle Friendship. Both should not exist at the same time. Like, it's kind of a paradox, but it's just me, the way that I set the scene. So let's render with the Golden Oak Library. That's pretty cool as well because there's a light source of the because there's a lamp that's outside. You don't really see it as a light source that much, but just the fact that you can actually have it as a light source is pretty cool in my opinion. And yeah, that's it's not perfect yet. I think for the needs for the project, I think should be fine. There, personally, I'm more concerned about the ground itself because the ground is a lot of grass with a lot of tiny details. It actually shows a bit better with. If you look, for example, the town hall, you'll see a bit better. There's no actual depth here. You see here the mud, the dirt, the ground. You kind of feel like there's some height. It's all done with bump maps. Basically, it just tells the renderer to just pretend there's some difference in height by basically just cheating with the angles. It's pretty cool. So it kind of helped to create a bit more detail because the ground itself is giant. Couldn't just go with massive texture. It would just kill the probably just kill the graphics card because the graphics card has 8 gigs of VRAM, which is pretty big. But once you go with you start to go with 4K textures, something with bit depth of more than 8. It's going to just start piling up. So yeah, that's a lot of details to count. One of the things that's really helped, actually, it's been in Blender for a long time. It's instancing. Like this house here and this house here are the same, just positioned differently. Uh, Not only did it help me because I just had to model one of them, but it also helped with memory usage. So it's a lot of details. Just try to create a set that just look good. Um, there's the hospital. There's the quilt and sofas that I added because a lot of good landscapes would help it to make it more, to make it more lively, to make it feel like there's some other details like. For example, there's some logs outside of the houses because I just assume that a lot of them don't have electric heating, so they probably still have wood outside to just bring inside for just to well to the cut, for some crates or some barrels, uh, and really helps with to just make it feel like a big scene, and the fact that I can actually go with and if you look at the camera when I rotate this really slow frame rate, and you're gonna think, well, it's pretty bad if you compare it with video game, and I can agree with that. But you also have to count into factor just the fact that that is still much faster than the render earlier that I showed with that just took it took 2 minutes just to get that, and let's say that it just looks bad nowadays for what I can do, and it's one of the showing that people improve over time. It's and it's good to look back at the old projects and to just reflect on what we did back in the days, what I can do now. This helps to go with it helps to get a good sense of perspective with that. It also helps with it also helps to think of what you could do next. Like I can see that there's stuff that I can still improve with that, and I'm happy to tell myself that over time I'll be able to improve it even more. So pretty nice. Uh, yeah, I think I still have 10 minutes, so I think we're gonna open with Q&A for questions because I had other stuff I wanted to show, but yeah, I think I want to show what people think would be more interesting first. So at least interesting to them. I mean. Oh, and when I was talking of reflections, the clouds here reflect in the water here, even though the clouds are much closer to the camera. Uh, was there? Oh yeah, one thing I forgot to show. One of the things with Luna's determination was that a lot of it came from 3D models. Basically, I had a 3D model of the entrance that I had instead of just going with vectors from the show that it just made it a bit darker. But I realized when I was doing renders for that, as that it just took forever to render. Just one image, I think back then took like 40 minutes to get at a high quality, because one of the things is that I switched to a ray tracer to path tracer. Instead of just calculating just one bounce of the light, it actually calculates all the bounces, or at least up to a point, the light limit in the sample you have. But it just instead of just calculating all the weight the rays with the samples, it just goes with basically just takes a few samples of all the ways that the light could bounce on the walls, for example. And the idea is that the more symbols you have, the more it's going to converge to the truth of the how the light behave here. And just doing that just took forever because it was using Arnold, which was pretty fast at doing that. But if I wanted to have more than just one picture, for example, I was talking about earlier the shot with Celestia on the balcony. Just one frame of that took about 15 minutes just to calculate all those things. And I had to actually get my boyfriend to actually do the render back then because my computer was just not capable enough. Um, because yeah, basically the just those calculations just took forever at high quality. Um, what I did in this determination, since I didn't have those resources, was I just did one render and I just painted over it in Photoshop and I just projected it and well, basically just extruded it to displacement. Well, not displacement, but depth. So they actually have a bit of perspective. It was not perfect, like it was stretched in some places, but it worked. Um, Basically, the render looked kind of like this. And I thought, well, let's try to improve it. Let's try to get. I think I forgot. Is there the stars? Oh yeah, I think that one doesn't even have the stars. Uh, but yeah, basically just one. Just good matte painting from one angle. It kind of helped. Kind of shaped a bit how the project would look like because it was a lot of dollies in. The less single point perspective because I realized that the stretching would be minimized if I had that. This will help with projects like the False Sunset Shimmer, where basically I kind of did a similar approach to that, where the diffuse and the diffuse part and the reflective part was separate. It would basically be stretched along with their depth map, and the depth map is basically the idea is that the farther it is, the brighter it is, and you basically had that, and you basically just told the computer stretch it more if it's brighter. So you have that, and the reflection part was basically its own depth as well. So that was and that was basically just me making one up in Photoshop, and it worked well. So you have the bit of dollying stuff. And looking back, I could have just used a zoom in, but wouldn't have felt like as you wouldn't have felt the depth as much in the scene. At least when I say depth, I'm not talking about story depth. I'm talking about physical depth. So yeah. There's any question? Yeah, because I'm not entirely sure what else to talk about. Just this pony vault model took. I say I've been working that for a year. It's not entirely true. I was working in that in parallel with the beginning of Harmony. I was a bit sad because since the beginning of Harmony was happening in, it was happening at a different place. I couldn't have any excuse to show that, and I was thinking, well, eventually I'll be able to show all the work that goes into that. Yeah, right now I'm really happy because I can actually show what this looks like. Um, so yeah, there's still a lot of work left to do with the Starlight Glimmer project. Hopefully, I be able to release it around summer, either summer or fall, because of the all the work that's still left to do. I also have a few other projects in parallel. Right now, I'm still working on a story for a Nordle project. And people look at that and think, oh, he's doing a non-pony project, and people think, oh, it's some kind of escape. But it's not really that. It's more of an idea I had in mind that wouldn't have fit as well for a pony project. Still has some of the spirit of fandom, but um, I felt if it was an original project, I could explore some of my own ideas as well. And I was thinking of as well. The fandom gave me so many things. I should, give back with my own original thing that that people could then look at and be inspired by, or at least look at and make their own ideas as well. because we've seen some original projects from your fandom as well, so yeah. Oh, that part. Oh yeah, I guess I could show a tiny little thing as well for the opening scene. It was really a proof of concept what the false sunset shimmer could be like because we realized that it was pretty cool because the original idea was that I wanted to have a shot with camera movement. Then I realized, well, let's go with a little zoom in. It really helped because I could actually see. It was pretty cool because I could actually go with uh, pretty smooth, but you have the head movement where you have Celestia that just turns her head instead of just cutting from one angle to the other and really snappy way. You would actually go with movement where you could actually feel the curve. Um, and then here you can see that the mate kind of doesn't make that much sense, but that's another thing. And you could it was pretty tricky as well because you had Celestia turning her head, but then you have Celestia then turning her head behind. So I had to use the main itself to kind of cover the weird parts of the head. With the rig, I had to switch. At some point, I had to switch the way that the layers were ordered. Actually, you can probably see it. Here. You can see the horn, because the horn is a 2D piece and the crown is 3D piece. The horn had to be swept from one to the other using a set. It was pretty tricky because of the way that things were ordered. Wait, no, it's seriously, Toon Boom, you really doing that? Wait, seriously? Oh, there we go. Yeah, sorry, I was not using the. Yeah, one of the problems with Toon Boom also that Flash doesn't really have, but that's because Flash already has enough problems as it is. Um, if you have, for example, a timeline or you have another view with the, for example, you have the node view on a separate layer, it doesn't really distinguish between which one belongs to what. So if you have two scenes open, you're kind of on your own. That happens. There's like 1 minute before the. Yeah. Okay, that happens. That's use syndrome selection. Yeah, back in the days, one of the problems I realized is that it's a spaghetti. So, oh, that was cut off. That happens.